We are now joined by a very special guest from the Monday Morning Quarterback and writer for Sports Illustrated, Emily Kaplan. Emily, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really well. How are you guys?
Doing very well. You had a piece on the Monday Morning Quarterback, which I loved, and it was talking about something that we talk about quite frequently on our program, which is with all this concussion stuff and with everything kind of happening in the NFL, how is this affecting football at the youth level? You kind of dug in. You had an interesting case study with one of the high schools just east of Cleveland, I believe. And you were just kind of dissecting some of the numbers about how in some regions it's declining and some regions football is actually even growing at the youth level. I just wanted to ask simply, what was the most astonishing statistic or thing that you uncovered when writing this piece?
That's a really good question. I think, going into the piece, we hear so much discourse about how concussions are really scaring parents away and how football is dying, especially at the high school level. But I think you kind of touched on it in the intro, and it's regional. And I think that the most shocking thing to me was, there are parts of the country where football really is declining. Ohio is one state, that's a traditional hotbed, and it really has declined in recent years. But in other areas, specifically the South, football is really growing. And so, our country is 50 different states, and each one is super unique with different circumstances, and it's so hard to group everything together.
And what about the parents of this situation? Did you, or of the kids that are playing football, did you get a sense that there was any fear from parents or that they were, concerned about the health, or was this something relatively not talked about?
Oh, no, absolutely. And if you know any parents or you are a parent of kids who play football, they talk about on the sideline of mothers and fathers who have a hard time watching or see what's going on Sundays in the NFL with collisions and concussions and say, I don't want that to happen to my son. A lot of it's anecdotal. A lot of it, they know someone who had a concussion or one of their son's friends had a concussion or so on. That said, what I found really interesting is that some of these high schools who are dropping programs, it's because of declining numbers, and not all of that has to do with head injuries. It's other types of injuries, too. And it's also just kids not coming out to play for a variety of reasons, whether they're specializing in other sports, not playing sports at all, or who knows what.
Emily, so I read a statistic from the National Center of Catastrophic Sports Injuries. They did a study basically that said there have been 243 football deaths between July 1990 and June 2010. And I guess, as I get older, when I look back on how dumb I used to be as a young man, I kind of start to feel like maybe kids shouldn't be allowed to do anything. Like we should just lock them in a room and just to keep them safe. But I'm wondering, at what point, where do you draw the line? What do you think is our responsibility for kids in this situation? Because, you don't want to have a situation where there's too many the numbers keep the kids from doing something fun, but you also, obviously our number one priority is to not have anyone, be injured or die. So where do you fall on that?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point. And, we're balancing this line where, we don't want to live like hermits. We don't want to, not promote our kids going out there and playing sports and being healthy and being good teammates and learning all the lessons that go there. At the same time, the number you just said was so disturbing. I hate playing devil's advocate here, but I'm going to say that high school football deaths are actually down from where they were when we look at it 50, 60 years ago. We used to see, I believe it was the 1970s, there was easily double-digit deaths each year from the high school football field. And the reason that's gone down is because high school football, I believe, is safer than it's ever been, with equipment and concussion awareness. So I think that as long as we keep going on this track, I am so happy to sign my son up to play football, as long as I know that there's a good program with good coaches and they're doing the right things. The question, I think, is what age I'm ready to let my son play. And I don't know if it would be until the high school level.
Well, you already asked my question that I was going to ask you at the very end, so thanks for that. Now, this is something about maybe football at the NFL level. One of the things that I've always postulated, I just made a word up, but one of the things that I've always thought about when it comes to the NFL was that in 10 years, 15 years, however long it took for the kids to be at that age of maybe deciding to play football for the first time, once they got to NFL level, that we would be seeing a decreased product. Do you feel as though right now that with some of the kids playing that we'll actually see some sort of a noticeable difference in the level of play at the NFL in 15 years?
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility if kids are picking up the sport later, or if they're not getting the proper techniques until maybe college, or even when they're entering the pros. I definitely think you could see that in the future, and I think that here's something really startling. I cover professional football for a living, and I talk to a lot of players, and I wouldn't name names, but I can name at least 4, maybe even 5 players who told me in the last 2 years that they would think long and hard about letting their sons play, and letting their sons play maybe, in high school is when they would sign them up. So if you're seeing football players who do this for a living saying that, imagine what the rest of the population is thinking.
Yeah, Emily, have you felt like, I mean, I know personally for me, like just knowing what, we've learned over the past few years, and just it's become harder to watch the NFL. And I was just curious, as someone whose livelihood is wrapped up in the sport, I mean, how have you felt over the past few years with all of this stuff? Obviously, you're writing articles about it, so you're not afraid of having the conversation. But I mean, what have your feelings personally been?
I remember the first time I wrote a story about concussions. I think it was probably 2 years ago, and I remember it was a story about a high school in Georgia and the attitudes down there, how they felt about health safety. And afterwards, for probably about a month, I had a really hard time watching football without thinking about concussions, without thinking about the long-term effects of CTE or what collisions would do to young brains or NFL brains. And it definitely made me feel uneasy. But somehow along the way, that kind of washed away. And I think my attitude toward it is kind of a microcosm for how America feels about football. And we become really concerned whenever there's a watershed moment, maybe like Chris Borland retiring, or a recent study about CTE, or players suing the league for in their concussion lawsuit. But then for some reason we kind of let that go away because we love the game of football, and I think that we're kind of grappling where the morality of football is and what place it has in our society, and how we can find the balance. And I definitely, as a reporter, as someone who has their livelihood in football, that's my career, I think about that a lot, and my attitudes totally shift. So I know that's not an easy answer, but that's kind of how I feel.
One of the interesting stats, we talked about it at the very beginning, but I can never get over it, how the football in the South is actually growing. The Midwest, maybe not so much, and the rest of the part of the country, it's slightly gone down, not overwhelmingly, but there's a little bit of a dip in participation. Why do you think it's growing in the South?
I think that the South is just such a traditional area for football, and in the South, it's so cliche, but you think about Friday Night Lights, and football really brings communities together. It's a meeting place. It's an event. It's something to do, and places like that just really thrive on that. It's not going away, and if anything, it's getting stronger.
Yeah, I mean, we have nothing going on, Mikey. There's nothing going on down there. That's why.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, no. There's plenty going on, and there's plenty of other areas where there's not much rural areas in the Midwest, and that's why I wonder, Ohio. That's one state that totally shocked me that it was dying. You think of such tradition in Ohio and such great players that came out of there, and the fact that it's decreasing at such a high rate is shocking.
She is Emily Kaplan from the Monday Morning Quarterback and Sports Illustrated. You got to check this article out. It's called High School Football at a Crossroads. Monday Morning Quarterback is one of my favorite websites. If it wasn't for that, this podcast here would struggle. I can already tell you that. So thank you so much for all of your writing and all of your work, and joining us this afternoon to talk a little football with us.
No, thank you guys. You're great. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Emily.